That's all that matters. Let's go ahead and rock and roll. So we're going to look at the character design final prompt, and then we'll jump right into some brainstorm time, which I have an example of my piece, but I'll even do, I'll probably demo a little bit like brainstorm. So like while you guys are working, I'll work on like another idea to kind of show some places you could go with it. And then we'll assign the homework card in just a minute so you can see that as well. We have some handouts, of course, a couple handouts you can look at. And then 5 minutes to the bell or 5 minutes to the end, we'll be on our merry way. First, let's look at our next week. So next Tuesday, I'll give you a more formal calendar of like our last days of class. If not, I'll even like drop it in on Teams over the weekend. But the basics of it would be our very last day is the 16th right here. And of course, today is when we're having our assigned finals. So like you're getting your final project today. And then of course we have 2 technical class days. And these days will be full of this one will be kind of like demos, like me demoing a couple of like last things just for the class that I'm interested in doing. If by some chance you're done with your final, we'll kind of have like crit part 1, like critique session part 1 to look at the final. And then our very last day of class, we'll critique whatever is left. Plus we'll do like a little ending, which I always like a little last class, couple last ideas. The problem is this day is really weird. I've noticed at ATI, like with all the different campuses, again, people tend to not be here sometimes on the very last day. So that's why we're going to have at least 2 days worth of critique. So we're here today. We'll have some little like kind of fun demo stuff on Tuesday while you're working on your final, and then 2 days of critique. As a reminder, you have a lot of absences, you're missing some assignments here towards the end. You are at a high risk of no pass, so you want to watch out for that, and I'll try to reach out personally on those ideas. And then I'm pretty hardcore about that last day of class, which would be if it's May 16th, that's like the last day I take work. The reason being I have to write progress reports, and then plus we just need some kind of deadline. So 16th is our last day to submit any work, which would include like some late work. We will try to talk about that on a case-by-case basis. Okay, so that said, let's jump into our day. Let's look at our final project. Let's talk about it a little bit. Let's get right into some brainstorm, which will involve you also doing a little bit of drawing and reference collection. So our final design prompt is detective. Your goal is to create an original character design based on the theme of detective. And you know that I enjoy things being ambiguous, which is, you mean like I like to be a little bit more open. So detective could be anyone who's investigating something. So of course on the screen, I put some very traditional types of detective. But if you're doing like futuristic, historic, surreal, I'll try to brainstorm a surreal idea today so I can show you an example of something that'd be kind of odd. But as long as it's a person who is investigating something, and because I like things to be a little bit open, you could almost pull that into like obsessed, like someone who's obsessed with a thing, investigating it. But otherwise be inspired, of course, by detective, which is a pretty cool role or like position that you can think about with a design. Like, who's this person? What are they investigating? And for our final, this is where we like to do our most fleshed out or like our biggest sheet of drawings, which would be you have a 3/4 drawing, a head sketch, and then an item call out. So as an example, here's the anteater detective. I just did like a New York cop kind of like vibe. Today when I brainstorm just for fun, I'll try to come up with something that's a little more narrative, right? Something that has like a little more story to it. But this would be how we want our final to look. We got detective theme, we have a full body, we have an item call out, and then at least one head sketch. And then of course, I even went the idea like it doesn't have to be human. So if you want to do something different, you can. In the past, I've kind of wanted to formally assign animal stuff because I think it's fun, even though it can tread into some tricky territory, which I don't do. But it is cool to like kind of play around with species and different types of like figures. So keep that in mind. Detective is the only theme. Could be a human, could be an animal, future, historic. And then we have examples of detectives, like these people, like even the sort of like Enola Holmes, or like in this case, female Miss Sherlock Holmes. We have kind of like these New York detective cop kind of vibes. We have someone that's almost like an archaeologist, almost like an anthropologist or archaeologist. So all that matters is when we look at your piece, we see someone who is investigating something. They're interested in something, or they embody that concept of detective. We just have this handout and one explaining the assets, meaning the stuff that needs to be delivered. So I'll give you this card real fast on altitude. Give me 1 second. Here we go. So I'm gonna put the due date for the 15th, even though, as I mentioned, the 16th is your last day you can turn it in. So feel free to turn it in, of course, on the last day. We'd like to critique your piece, but yeah, formally you have till the 16th. I'll just put it as the 15th so you're reminded. We'd love to critique your piece by that last Tuesday. So there's our prompts. Again, these are our deliverables, as we call it. You'll see those on the card as well. So with the theme of detective, and we'll put that right here. What we're going to work on today is we would like you to grab an idea or think of an idea. Here's our prompt. And we'd like you to work in class on a quick sketch of your idea. This could be a pose. This could be like things that just sort of inspire you about the piece. And then some reference collection would be great as well. So as a prime example, if you really wanted to have a nice day in class, which since we're getting started right away, we have a very solid about 35 minutes to work. A great thing would be that you have, some sketches, or like a quick little character sketch concept of like what your character is, and then maybe even have like a little mood board with some pictures on it, right? And as always, I'll do the same thing. I'll demo the same thing. Now with this idea of detective, of course, and we're working in class to make a quick sketch, a little bit of reference collection. My job is to help you. So if you have a question and you're like, hey, I'm thinking about this idea, could you help me with some pictures or some ideas? Obviously, I'd stop everything I'm doing to help you. But just to have your typical flow, like a little commentary, a little noise, like you need it, right? A little noise in the background. I'll do another idea. So I did what I call my very like generic idea. I like stuff like this. It's actually so that people don't get too challenged about like, the idea. It's like, hey, if you just want to do a detective, go for a detective, right? But I'll come up with an idea that's a little bit more surreal, or like breaks the mold of detective, and I'll brainstorm that while you guys are working, just so you have some background noise. So our goal is at 45 minutes, about 45 on the hour. We'll check this out. Right now it's about 11 minutes on the hour. So actually I was wrong. We have about, even about 35 or so right on the dot. So there's a little time. And I'll update this. So with detective, think of an idea. Of course, take a minute to marinate. Think of some little sketching you can do to present to us, and then maybe even some pictures. So with that said, I will begin. And what I'll do is I'm actually going to, you of course can be working alongside while I'm working, but I'm going to show you or talk about something very cool that I learned from another character designer whose name is John Polidora. I'll grab some of his work real quick. I like job stuff, right? So John worked at Riot, I think, if I remember correctly. This is a guy who worked at Riot. And as I always say, if you bother me outside of class, I'll find this for you. I'll show it to you. I watched this video that John put about character design, and he had this really fascinating way to like kind of design a character and think about like how to make a person read the character in the order they wanted. So for instance, if I'm like an art instructor male, right? I'm a male art instructor or whatever. It's kind of like the ways that we say, is this like an art instructor who happens to be a guy, or is this a guy who happens to be an art instructor? This can be very important with your audience, like how they read it in order. So while you're working, I'll work and I'll kind of explain this system that I find really cool that John talked about. And this is something I do for my college students, but we have some pretty high-end people in here, so I'm excited to talk about this. This is kind of like how John would brainstorm from this cool video I watched years ago, which I employ every time I'm doing, especially some really serious character stuff. So the first thing you would do is you would think of an idea with 3 distinct words. So for the character. One of the most challenging things I've said this a couple of times about designing character when you first start is don't actually think about colors and things that are surface level. So don't think of things like, oh, I want the character to have like a jacket, or I want them to have boots, or yeah, they wear a red hat or something. Instead, like avoid all those things. So I'd say on here, avoid colors, kind of like surface details. So I mean, like stuff that's great, like oh, they have a monocle or something. It's like we like that. That's cool, but it's not quite the big ideas, etc. 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 As we say in Italian. So let's come up with these 3 distinct words. So I've actually given you one already. I told you that you need to design a detective. So we have a detective. To help with this idea, especially with like the piece that John has on the left, I'm going to pick another animal because this is a way that you can see this idea really take off. So I'm going to do a detective just for fun because it's out there. I'll do a mouse detective, right? That's like a common character from the film, of course. And then for fun, because I'm goth, I'm going to say undead. So either a mouse detective that investigates the undead, and a detective that's literally undead, right? Like some kind of spirit or like, almost zombie kind of character. So these are my 3 ideas: detective, mouse, undead. So when I present it to you, for instance, and say, I'm going to make this mouse detective who I'll just say, excuse me, investigates the undead, would probably be easier. Or is undead. I'm going to go with that, is undead. Now, with each of these words, and the first one, of course, will be me helping out. Detective, mouse, and undead. What you would do is you would think of 5 things that make us understand or recognize these words. So for instance, if we had a mouse and we said, what makes us think of a mouse? We'd probably say the tail. It's like a mouse tail. Ears can be very distinct on a mouse. They look kind of like maybe big compared to the mouse. We have fur. Maybe we have like their mouse teeth. And then let's ask Nolan. Nolan, like if you're thinking about like a mouse, I said like a tail, ears, fur, maybe their teeth. What's like one more thing that is like makes a mouse, or like makes you think of a mouse like visually?
Eyes.
Okay, so maybe like they're like little beady eyes, right? They kind of like those little small
Yeah.
eyes. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Or nose.
The nose, I like that. I like the nose a little more. So we'll say the nose. Because that's very distinct, right? Especially here's like a little doodle, like if we saw like a little, yeah, mouse kind of nose, eyes. That's more like a possum, but I'm gonna leave it because possums are cool. So yeah, let's say like the nose. So that's the idea, is like, okay, what are these like 5 ideas to make us think of a mouse? Now here's where it gets challenging. Detective. We'd say, what are these 5 things that represent or show like a detective, like a person who's sleuthing, right? To use some verb. So one of the first ones for me would be a magnifying glass. Like if someone's walking around with like the magnifying glass, they look like a detective. Zaya, what's like another thing that makes a detective or someone look like one?
Like some mysteriousness to them, mystery.
How do you visually show that?
Hat.
A hat, very good. I like that. See, like a hat, because they have to be disguised, like a little bit incognito. Mia, let's hear from you. Mia, what do you think would be like another idea for a detective, like something visually that makes someone look like a detective?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Let me prod you a little bit. Like, think of like Sherlock Holmes, which maybe you've seen like the newer show, or you just know like the lore of Sherlock Holmes. Like, what does Sherlock Holmes like wear or use that you feel like looks like?
Yeah, he wears like, I guess it's like a long type of like coat with like
Yeah,
a cape.
Yeah,
like
that's a great
very,
one, right?
you
Yeah,
you said not to mention colors, but like that was my first thought, is like lots of shades of like a brown or gray or black, very dark or like neutral. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Now we will get to that, like especially in the design, but it's good. I'm glad you're holding back because you're right. Colors are important because we think, yeah, detectives are kind of like they're not bright colored. They're usually sort of like muted because they're moving through the streets. But that's part of like strong design is we're like, how do we not use a color? Because a coat is perfect. You said like a coat, and that goes a lot to like the hat as well, like a long coat. Same thing. It's like disguise. They could put stuff into it, right? So yeah, hat, long coat. So now a couple more would be, I'm gonna go with like a pipe. Even though I know it's 2023, it can be scandalous to talk about smoking, right? But like the detectives and cops and everyone you see, things like that, they're usually like smoking, right? Which is stress even. It's like, oh, it's from stress, or it's just part of the lore, especially like Sherlock Holmes with the pipe. So that's like something that maybe could be a little bit different for you all, but for much of like 20th century, like if you saw someone with like the pipe and the magnifying glass, right away you say like detective. Speaking of last couple of things is we could say like, you know, they have a magnifying glass, they could have glasses potentially. And then maybe we'll put on here, maybe they have a gun, right? Maybe they're like a true copper detective and they need protection, they need a weapon. So they might have like a small gun or a small arm. Which I didn't draw that on my character, but I did draw this piece right here. That's like the holster. So it's like this piece that wraps around and would have like, in theory, like a weapon there. I went with like the little cigarette nod. Okay, and then last thing would be undead. So we actually want this character to be undead, because that's more of a physical characteristic of the character. So undead, I'll just wrap this up. We'd say things like one of the first ideas I think about is bones, like exposed bones. So for instance, if someone's like a zombie or quote unquote dead and now they're undead, you can like maybe their skin's falling, you see bones, things like that. They might have the blue eye kind of idea, like sort of a blindness, like a blue eyes, I'll say one or two, to look undead. They would probably be very uh not like, I don't know why the word's not coming to me, tattered. They're very tattered. So I mean like their clothes are kind of like banged up. There's like patches and things, or it's like torn clothing. Ryan, I see that Ryan, that you came in. Yeah, very good. Don't this flesh sticking out. I'll put that like flesh looking kind of stuck out. So Ryan, just to catch you up real fast, we are presenting our final, Ryan, which you'll see in your altitude, our final character design prompt, which the theme is detective. And I mentioned to everyone that detective could be very traditional. So you could do just a cop or detective, but all that matters is it could be someone who's investigating something. So it can be a little bit more paranormal or weird or strange, as long as it's someone who is investigating something, or we can tell that they're interested in investigating something. The requirement for the homework you'll see, Ryan, on the card is to do a full body drawing colored of the character, a head sketch of the character, and then finally this, what we call item call out, like a small piece that's highlighted or detailed. And then finally, what we're doing right now, Ryan, is we're saying that as a class, like in class, with this theme of detective, we want you to work on a quick sketch of your idea, and then maybe even collect some pictures to show us, to sort of present your idea at 15 minutes on the hour. So that way we can brainstorm together. And then of course, my true favorite thing is you can get some feedback. We can give you some feedback on your idea. So that's what we're working on right now. And then even though I have a piece that I did, I'm doing another one, and I'm actually demoing a concept for character design. So I'll be doing that while you work, Ryan. Of course, let me know if you have any questions. And again, if anyone has actual questions about your piece, I can stop and of course help you out. So 5 things about undead: bones, blue eyes, tattered clothing, the flesh sticking out. And then maybe the last thing would be, I have one that's like not that impressive. I was going to say kind of like barefoot is something that makes you think of like undead, like they don't necessarily need shoes, like they don't experience a lot of pain or something. But I don't think that's really good. Oh, I got the idea. It's like kind of like overgrown hair. So like if you think about anyone who's quote unquote like undead or a zombie, one of those ideas is like, well, they're not going to like the barber. So they kind of have like maybe overgrown hair, like a beard or like long hair or something. So that can kind of like add to that. Okay. Now, a guy like John, what's cool is he probably got this from school or a class or something. But for now, I'm just call it like the John method because I was so struck by it and I learned it from him. So I'm just going to cite it to him for now. So here's kind of like the John method with all this information. So the John method would be if I was making an undead mouse detective, I can actually rearrange these three words in different permutations. I'm not a math person, but pretty sure that's the term. So like these different combinations or permutations where I can arrange it in different ways. So as an example, I could say this character is a detective who is a mouse that is undead. I could say this character is an undead mouse who happens to be a detective. And then I can go through all the combos, but just to give you et cetera, like more and more, et cetera again. Lastly, I could say this character is a mouse who is undead, who happens to be a detective. You can rearrange the words over and over again. And the idea is that when you make a character, you want your audience to read the character in a certain order. And more importantly, you want to emphasize or de-emphasize concepts. So as an example, I drew an anteater detective, right? This character up here. If you think about it, this is not an anatomically correct anteater. This isn't an anteater that's on all fours that has like a little badge on its back or something, and it inspects for ants. You know, it doesn't have like an anteater anatomy. It's actually just basically a human with an anteater head. It's what we call like sort of the anthropomorphic kind of character, which again treads on territory that can be tricky that I'm not into. So that's why I prefer the human ones. So the idea is that the order that you would read my character, for instance, would be a detective anteater versus being an anteater detective, right? And that changes the way that you're drawing and thinking about the character. So, like math, which is very reliable, we want these formulas. This is how we are successful over and over again. We don't reinvent the wheel every time. You know, we can be creative, we can be very surreal, you know, fantastical in our ideas. But if it's too weird every single time, like how we arrive at an idea, you'll never have reliability, right? So the reliability would be, you have the character, think of three concepts about them: detective, a mouse, undead. You think of five things, at least five things that could be the visual cues for those words. And again, avoid color, try to avoid things that are too ambiguous. Even I'd like to admit that the mouse one gets a little bit ambiguous for me with like just saying fur and nose, probably could push that a little bit further. Detective one's good, undead. And then decide on your order. Do you want this character, in my case, to be anatomically a mouse who is undead and happens to crawl around on the ground as a mouse and inspect things? Or do I want a full-blown detective who is undead who happens to have a mouse tail? It's like a human almost with like a mouse tail. And the idea would be whatever order you pick. So in this case, I'm going to go kind of in the original order because that's largely where my brain is going. I want to make a detective who is a mouse who happens to be undead. And from this list, what I would do is I would try to use all five things for the first one. So the first idea is the most important. So let me show all five of those characteristics. The mouse, I'll try to choose three important things. So for instance, my character is probably going to stand up like a human, but I'll give it like mouse nose or like, you know, snout, like Nolan said. I'll probably give it a tail, and then maybe I'll give it the mouse ears, right? Something along those lines. And then finally, the one that's least important, or we should say is just de-emphasized, try to take like one thing from it. So as an example, right off the bat, my storytelling would be that if the character only has one attribute that's undead, like flesh sticking out, bones exposed, maybe like a blind, cloudy eye or something, maybe the character is trying to investigate his origins. He's trying to figure out, like, why is he becoming more and more undead? Why are parts of him starting to fade away or erase or become strange, right? And he must investigate that. Maybe he, as a detective, encountered someone and caught a curse of some kind, etc., right? But the idea would be like, well, that's his least important concept, is that he's undead. And what's cool is it drives my story. He's not fully undead. Maybe he's investigating why. But what you would do then is you would say, when someone looks at my drawing, I want them to see detective as the strongest concept first. Mouse is the second strongest concept. And the fact that they're undead is the flavor. It's a small flavoring or spice that I put on at the end. I could reverse this whole thing, right? I could say they're undead detective and they're a mouse, which would mean I'm going to use all my undead characteristics. This person's just got bones sticking out, the blind eyes, the torn clothing. They're a detective, so they got 3 of those things. They got like a magnifying glass, the long coat and the hat, right? The Sherlock kind of thing. And then there's something about them that's mouse-like, which funny enough could even be that they're human, but they happen to have like teeth that look like a mouse, or their nose sort of sticks out in a mouse way. And so we're like, I guess this person's kind of like a mouse. They kind of have like a tail or something, or their face. And so you're prioritizing, again, emphasizing and de-emphasizing. And the whole point about all this, I'm going to erase this when we're writing huge letters, just like the other day when we had Zaya with the glasses looking at the prompt and reading correctly, right? The whole point of all this, you must be intentional. I'm going to talk to you as an artist. I'm going to remove Mr. David for a second and take the Mr. David hat off, put on the artist hat. You must be intentional. We don't want anything about what you're doing to be an accident. You can have serendipity. I mean, you can have things that are like, I'm inspired, or like, wow, in the middle of the design, I decided to change the way that the jacket looks, or now I want them to have like this cool colored hair or something. You can be inspired, but overall, you want to be intentional. We don't want you as a designer, as an artist, especially, to make things on accident. And we don't want you to have these designs that have no intention, because then your audience won't get it. So if you have an idea, you're really committed to it, you're excited about it, and then your audience goes like, well, yeah, like, I don't really get this. Like, oh, they're undead. Oh, okay, thanks for telling me. I'm glad you told me that. I totally don't see that. You can't be mad. I mean, like, you can't be upset about that potentially, because the more intentional we are, the more we show these things to our audience, they'll get the whole story. And the coolest thing we can do, even this, is very cheap. This is a cheap, quick character design, little one-off, throw it in the homework example. But the cool thing would be, we want people to make a story without hearing a single word, right? No words, no animation, no storytelling or anything, no supporting images. We'd love them to see one picture and already start crafting a story. Wow, this is this like grouchy looking anteater detective, tired eyes, right? Smoking cigarettes. He's got shoes that point to something more classical, turn of the century, etc. And so that's why we want to be so intentional visual. And then don't be afraid of this stuff. Don't be afraid of math. Again, I make all these jokes about not liking math, or I don't really do math. I don't think like in math ways. But don't be afraid of formulas. You should have formulas and sandbox. That's how you can screw with stuff. That's how you can mess with it. Okay, now, last thing, I'm going to keep doing a quick little doodle. Last thing is, someone like John would normally doodle multiple examples of these combinations. So someone like John in his video will show you like, oh, I'm gonna do the different combinations of these words, and I'll do little thumbnail doodles of each one to see which one I like more, which one like sticks out. Now for me, I'll just do like a couple for time's sake. So I'm kind of like setting myself on this path of the detective mouse who's undead, because I want to show like, how can I use 5 of those things from the list? How can I use 3 from the mouse list? How could I use just one undead thing? So I'll doodle a bit over here. It's 33 on the hour. We're doing great. We have another about 12, 13, 14 minutes. We have not too many people in here, so we can also bend the time a little bit. It's okay if we squeak time towards the end. That way we just show our stuff off. Yeah, I would say at this point, if you haven't already, hopefully you have an idea. Hopefully you're not marinating too long. You have something going on. Collect some photos, at least some reference pictures to show us some of your idea. And then if you're able to, of course, make a little thumbnail sketch, something we can see in class. If you need help with any of that, you can ask me. But okay, so I'll work on this detective mouse undead. So first thing is actually back from the handout, we could look for a nice kind of detective pose. I certainly like the magnifying glass. You can't go wrong with that. So I think my first idea is we would do kind of like the character similar to that archaeology one, inspecting something. So kind of looking at something, which should probably be undead looking, like even a skull or something. I'll do a little thumbnail. And then I'll talk about how I'm using these 3 ideas. So if nothing else, this is highly formulaic, meaning like this is a system, I should say. Formulaic sometimes gets a bad rap. Formula implies like you're not being creative or thoughtful. You definitely are, trust me. But what we prefer to say is this is like a good system. No one says I'm thinking of Pony real fast. No one says I'm thinking of a cyborg detective. Yeah, Nolan, if you don't mind participating a bit, what would be like that third word? If you're thinking about some of these ideas, like the attributes stuff, like so it's a cyborg detective. What's like that third concept, like that third sort of quality to the character? Cyborg detective. You know, cyborg is already like the species kind of, so it's like not human, it's like robotic. Detective, of course. And then let's see. Feminine. Okay, yeah, that's great. So yeah, you could do like a feminine flip phone here. The feminine. I'll hook you up, Nolan, with the E. There we go. Yeah, feminine cyborg detective. Yeah, that's great. Especially because my first thought would be, depending on what you want to do, feminine would probably be in the middle or like the lower prioritization. And if you want to have fun, of course, with this prompt, a lot of us might do like detective as like the push, like that's one of the first things, or like where a lot of it's going. But yeah, play with this idea. As I was saying with the system idea, even if you don't write it fully out, what I would challenge you to do is think of 3 words, like try to always have these 3 words. And a really nice way to look at it would be, it's a character, it's a blank who is blank, meaning like that third thing's usually kind of like a little accent or flavor. Zaya says on here, thinking of a fox detective, which of course is great. So you already got 2 going on. You have like, we know the detective, we know the role, we know species, we know it's a fox. You can gender a little bit, but something that would be interesting is that flavor again, that story. That could be something as random as like Egyptian, right? Or that they're like Sumerian detective or something. So it can point towards like language, like a visual language and design, certain like era or certain kind of like geographical design. You are allowed to truly say like old and young. You can do things like that. It's an old fox detective, it's a young fox detective. Because those do, this goes back to when Mia was talking about color, and I was saying, it's good to like hold off on color. And I'll say this to everyone, like age is a easy one to throw in there that does have a lot of those characteristics. So when you say like an old fox detective, our minds would run right away. What makes someone old? We'd say glasses, worn out clothing, the posture, right? They're like hunched over. They have a cane or something, right? So you can mess with age a little bit when it comes to that third word. That's actually tough. Middle-aged. So middle-aged, it's a little bit like for me, because I have fun with this, it's a little bit funny because one of my first thoughts would be like graying, meaning like the characters, if it was like a fox or a person, their hair furs graying. But that's illegal, as we'd say. I mean, like that'd be a color idea, but be careful with that. In fact, one of the funnier ideas would be if you said that gray hair makes someone look old or graying hair makes someone look middle-aged. That's a color idea. I would counter it by saying, well, what if the hair is just thinning, right? The fur is thinner or the hair on the character is thinner. It's not as like happy, bright, voluminous. That's the same idea, but you're removing color. You're thinking more physical. I'll put this on here. So yeah, Zaya says eccentric, which I like, even though it kind of points towards a pose, right? It kind of points towards like a pose or like a personality. And you can look at a pose and say eccentric. Now, some of those synonyms could be like eclectic and stuff, meaning like maybe besides eccentric like pose, you also mean like they just have lots of like doodads and things, right? They're sort of eclectic, like are they a detective that has like lots of little devices and lots of little junk kind of like on their coat or clothing. And that points towards eclectic. Eclectic being someone that has, you know, potentially stuff like that. They have a lot of trinkets and like, you know, little ephemera. They have this, again, you can't do color. Or I was say like they have kind of like bright color, but you can't do that. They have a lot of pattern is not bad. I would fight myself and say that. So you could say like patterned versus like color. You could say like, oh, they just have lots of contrasting patterns, which makes them look very eccentric or eclectic. That's a tricky one, but you could work with it. It could definitely happen. And take it from me, like if you want to draw like a dog, draw a dog. I mean, like for anyone in class, you want to draw something, draw something. But this system is cool because it's pushing stuff like we're talking about. I mean, like it's kind of pushing you to think physical, to think of even up to 5 things. Like, is your term or your idea worth like 5 attributes? That's what I like so much about it. That's why I come back here and I say, hey, I'm really chill about my little anteater detective. But he doesn't have a lot of story yet. He doesn't have like a lot going on that like really describes him. Doesn't even really have like that third word necessarily, besides like maybe grumpy, you know, and even then that's not great. So you can make things quickly, but when you're going for that really, really strong idea, that's where the system is really cool. You want to work with this idea. Yeah, eccentric, again, eclectic. That's cool stuff. Fox detective. One of the main ideas, even again, this is where it's broad New York cop kind of thing, is like, well, what is the detective, the sleuthing? What is it for? What's it about? What is the character investigating? That can point to a lot of things. Oh, this is very cool. By the way, let's give ourselves about another 5 minutes before we want to start talking and showing some stuff off, just because I want to make sure we get out on time. So Zay says, what about a fox detective that has a lot of surprises? Like he hides things in his jacket, weapons, handcuffs, things like that. Yeah, so actually a really funny thing, of course, is one of the first references would be Inspector Gadget, right? Which is very old. I don't know if anyone knows that. Definitely aging me. Inspector Gadget is literally an inspector, literally with junk all over his body, right? He like transforms and things like that. In fact, speaking of great character designs, this might be a very corny character design, but this gets the job done. It's like, we know this guy. This actually has things that Mia was talking about. He's wearing a long coat. He's got a hat. He has junk coming out of his head, including a magnifying glass. Like, talk about a design again that's showing, hey, this person's got junk to inspect. So going back though, yeah, so he has these things. So one of the first words that came in my head that I thought was fun, but it's not, maybe not fully, is kind of like a trickster, is an interesting idea, which that's an archetype of literature, of course. So the character is kind of like a trickster. Loki is a very famous example of a trickster. So yeah, that's kind of cool where you're like a fox detective trickster, you know. Yeah, and Zaya says yes. Yeah, and then that's what's cool about that is that goes back to that emphasis where you could think of, in fact, I'll do this before we start talking because I find this very challenging. What are 5 things that make someone like trickster? Very, very hard. But yeah, I was gonna say is that that's where you could kind of de-emphasize it. Like a detective who's a fox, who's a trickster. So trickster's kind of lower end on the visual language of the character, but it's fun that it's the flavor. It's like what flavors the character. Trickster, again, very hard. Yeah, you'd say first of all, I don't know what we call like the weapon handcuff, like hiding and stuff. Well, here's the one that's interesting. This is very classical. You don't have to do this. I'm just having fun with like what makes a trickster. Shape shifting would be one of the first things about trickster. That's very Native American kind of trickster stuff. Which, by the way, a fox, if I recall correctly, I don't want to get this wrong. I can look it up later. Fox in Native American literature can have attributes like that. Can be sort of a mysterious kind of character, mysterious sort of archetype. So yeah, like shape shifting. Yeah, it's like tricks, like literally, but you're talking about devices or like ways they hide it. Yeah, I'm gonna fight myself on this. I wouldn't call this a color thing. I'm saying heavy pattern. So meaning that a trickster, someone with deception, wouldn't necessarily be totally blank and cloaked in like flats. They would kind of have like differing pattern in their outfit, things like that. Again, I'll fight myself. I swear it's not color. It's like a physical thing to look at that's black and white versus being colored. Weirdly, like boots for some reason, because I'm thinking of like the sharp language of like a boot, as well as like things like a genie and stuff like that that wear like pointed shoes. So somehow that's like a thing for me that you could think of with trickster. That sharpness also just feels a little bit like deceptive. It's got some of that like vibe going. That's airtime, so we'll get talking in a second because we're hitting 45 on the hour. Last 2, just to round it out for fun. Shape shifting, heavy power, and boots. Probably like a mask. It's technically something that a trickster would have, especially for the idea of deception. And then to really go back to Zai's original idea, even just like pouches, right? I mean, like things that they're hiding, pouches, flasks. They have like little, again, spells, items, things like that. Maybe they have like an icon, meaning like they have a sort of like an ankh or something, a very important symbol. Nolan says, how about mysterious? Now, mysterious is cool for your flavor. It's for something to throw into like your third one. Because what you would do with mysterious, I'll put it right over here, is you would do some things like kind of like big clothing is a funny one. So I mean, like if someone's mysterious, they're not wearing like a swimsuit. It's like the opposite. They're kind of like covering themselves a lot. They're sort of like cloaked, as we were saying earlier. They have like cloaking, or they're you don't know everything about them because they're hidden under this big clothing. Therefore, that's what creates the mystery, right? So yeah, mysterious you can mess with. That's like an interesting one. Some of that gets into like the posing and things, but overall it's cool. I see our time though. We'll get going. I'll help you more with that, Nolan, if we need some help with the words. Yeah, Nolan says this one I'm going for. I would go with like hiding a lot when it comes to mysterious. Like the posing and like the face or something can say it, but the clothing idea that like covers a lot of the character. Like for instance, if you're going with a cyborg, one of the more interesting ideas is like we don't really know the character is a cyborg. You see like a hint of it or something under the clothing, and that's mysterious, right? Like, oh, weird. Is this like a human? Is this like a cyborg? So you can kind of mess with that. Okay. So let's squeeze all of this over here. And let's hear these ideas. Already some nice stuff coming from Nolan and Zaya. And then we'll give each of you, of course, a little bit of space. So let's get at least some reference pictures in the chat. You can all start doing this as we speak. There's not that many of us, so it won't get that confusing. So you can just start to drop things in there, and I'll pick them as we're talking to you. But otherwise, what we're interested in, of course, is with the idea of detective. What are you going for with your character? And we will begin with Mia. So Mia, tell us a little bit about what you've been considering and what you're checking out. Yep. Are you there, Mia? We will go to Nolan. So Nolan, tell us a little bit about what you're thinking about. Oh, I see some file. Awesome. Let me grab on here real quick. Very cool. I love this idea of the finger lighting the cigarette. That's great. So yeah, Nolan, tell us a little bit about like what you're thinking about. So you said cyborg detective. What are some of the thoughts? Or like, why are you going into cyborg? What's inspiring that?
I went with cyborg because that's something you wouldn't really think of,
Mm-hmm.
and also I wanted to challenge myself a bit.
Yeah.
And also, a cyborg is like he's not really an open book as much. Neither is the detective, so
Mhm.
I just decided to combine those two.
Yeah, I mean, like part of being a detective is even though like Sherlock is portrayed as like kind of emotional, you have to be sort of like emotionless. You have to be objective, right? You're trying to like solve something. So that's cool to like tie in the idea of like a cyborg, which is not a very emotional sort of character. Um, this is very strong already, like this concept. Like this is a rare time where I'd say I wouldn't mess with this concept. I mean, like I would definitely like figure out some way to shoehorn this or like make this into the final. This idea of him like lighting it with the thumb and all that, that's really cool. Um, some bonus points if you could like turn the shoulder a little bit more so that you get this part
Mhm.
popping out of the silhouette. That could be really nice. See like the flame and everything.
Mhm.
But yeah, overall, I like the idea. Cyborg detective, you were saying at the end, like a little bit like mysterious is the flavor,
Yeah.
which I think is great with, the big coat. Yeah, the hat covering the eye. And then to be honest, like I don't want to reduce the design, but yeah, it could be just kind of like a big trench coat. You do something interesting with the feet, whether they're like boots or they are like a little bit more mechanical. Um, and then the last like thing I'd tell you is maybe there is some kind of like insignia, some sort of like symbol or branch to give us like a weird hint about like what's this person about, even if it's just like a globe or something. It could be anything, but just to show like, oh, they are they like a private detective or do they like belong to an organization of some kind? And that's what we call like kind of a little bit like world building, right? You show some sort of like interesting symbol or something, and that tells us like there's more to this detective. There's more of this guy. Like maybe he's like a
Mhm.
line of cyborg or something. That could be kind of cool.
Okay.
Do you have any questions right now about it?
Mhm.
And then one more quick question is, what do you think of like style? Like, what kind of style are you going for?
I'm going for like a classic like detective coat to
Hmm.
like increase the mysterious,
Hmm.
and then maybe like some cool leather like shoes or something that usually detectives wear. But other from that, I don't know. But I think I have an idea.
Yeah. Okay. One hint would be because I did this on mine. One of the most important things that dates all of us is actually shoes. Like when you take photos of people, you look at photos from like the 80s, 70s, any time in the world or in existence. Shoes are like one of the biggest things that dates a photo or dates us as humans. So you can put some thought into that, whether, yeah, they're like weirdly classic kind of shoes, again, like turn of the century sort of stuff, or if they are very futuristic, you can kind of tell us about the time of this world based on just the shoe. So that'll be something as you think about it. You're already putting some thought into it, but I get very serious about it. Be like, what's the exact shoe I really want this character to wear? Because then when we see it, it'll kind of point towards the historical idea, like what time is this character in? Very cool. Ryan, I know you said that you we're not able to possibly share a drawing, but do you mind sharing your idea with us? Tell us a little bit about what your idea is. We'll give Ryan a minute. And then I have of course, I have yours ready. In fact, while Ryan's hopefully typing, I'll put it on here. Oop, let me try to get that thumbnail part out of the way. There we go. Yeah, we'll give Ryan a little bit to type. So yeah, Ryan, just tell us your idea in chat so I can check it out. Zaya, here, I'll do this big actually. But Zaya has yeah, this like fox sort of detective. I really like this wild kind of like assassin. Like this is really interesting, right? They're a detective, but they're like, yeah, an assassin or something. It's very intense kind of weaponry. Also very cool just for the what I call like matrix, like the literal pattern, like where he'll kind of have like this interesting sort of stuff going through him, which is that complication of detail I think is nice. So yeah, detective, an animal, trickster, pockets. I like that. Yeah, like pockets, tools, the eye patch. I like that a lot. That's that Kakashi thing, right? Where it's like, well, what's under the eye patch? Is it missing or is there something going on? So that's cool. Yeah, very, very cool. I think yeah, I think my big question would be kind of like what I was just saying, no, like what do you think is the time frame for this character? Is this kind of like futuristic, kind of like in the past? What do you think?
I don't even know how to explain it. Like, I was heavily inspired by this game called Devil May Cry, and I'm
Oh, yeah.
not sure when it's set. Do you know it?
I do. That one's tricky because like his weapons are kind of like futuristic, even though everything around him is very gothic, like almost like I wouldn't say
Yeah.
medieval, but like he's like in sort of like big buildings and like castle looking stuff.
Mhm.
But yeah, he has futuristic weapons. So yeah, that's a good question. I don't really know like
I
what Devil May Cry is.
I feel like maybe like somewhat post-apocalyptic-ish, but like very gothic. I'm not exactly sure how to explain it. I think it's more modern day
Hmm.
than ancient, but there's some elements of like ancient times. I was thinking of kind of giving him maybe like cowboy boots.
Okay, yeah. Oh, I like that. So like a little bit of like Western visual.
Yeah.
That ties in a lot, right? So we have like Western, post-apocalyptic. Um, Fallout's really good for that, like the game Fallout, like Fallout New Vegas,
Oh,
Fallout
yeah.
3. So you might look at some of the cool like clothing or like weapons or just like that kind of visual language. Which if I haven't told you by the way, like look at the game, but of course just type it in, type in concept art. That's always like some of the nicest stuff you can see is like those previs kind of ideas. But yeah, I if I had to pick one or like tell you to encourage, I'd go with like the post-apocalyptic. I think that's kind of cool. It even explains like why there's like a fox dude. He's a chimera or something. He's almost like a potentially some sort of futuristic idea that he's like a fox who's now a detective. He's evolved. Yeah, that's cool. Devil May Cry. That's kind of like the stuff we were brainstorming as well, where you could say like, oh, my character's like Devil May Cry meets Red Dead, Redemption, or what's that game called? I forget from that game, Red Dead. Boy, I'm getting old now. Why can't I remember the name of that game? It's actually really cool. Yeah, Red Dead Redemption. Okay.
Resident Evil?
No, I was thinking Red Dead Redemption, which is it's a Western
Oh.
game from Rockstar. And it's Western, but it's got some like also nice like heavy visual language stuff going on. I'll show it real fast, and then I'll show Ryan's idea. Here we go. Yeah, so some good like jackets and stuff, good like language, good proportion you could potentially use in something like that. But yeah, I'm into that. I like the idea, especially the post-apocalyptic. I think that's a good way to lean. And I really like Devil May Cry being inspiration because all that gothic stuff will make good inspiration for pattern work, even like stuff you might put into the jacket. Okay, let's put Ryan's and then I'll show the card and then we gotta be on our merry way. Oh yeah, very cool. So Ryan was saying the frog in Ryan's room inspired the idea of like the frog and toad books and like that corduroy jacket to do like a detective, so like a frog detective. Yeah, that's actually a great I appreciate your little train of thought there. Like I saw a frog and then I thought about frog and toad and then like maybe a the jacket, and that gives a detective. Yeah, no, I appreciate too that no requirement obviously, but it is fun to do a little bit of the animal work, especially because you get to play with this idea, like, are you trying to make, in the case of a frog, like, so is it like a frog detective that has like a human hand, like a 5-finger hand? Does it have kind of like a actual frog hand? These are those decisions you make, especially when you're doing this kind of stuff over here, like I talked about during class. You're kind of like, do I use all 5 quote unquote ideas of the frog, or just like 2 or 3 ideas of the frog and he has a human hand? So I'm excited to see that idea for sure, Ryan. And then for a lot of us actually, because so far what we have in common is no one's doing a human, which is cool. We have a cyborg, we have a fox, we have a frog, and it'll tie in very well to what I just talked about today, which is how much or how little of those species or like ideas are you trying to put into the design? You know, even as we have like a big walking fox over here, right? It's like basically a cool anthro-human anatomy with a fox head. So again, it'll be interesting to see what you guys do with that. As we mentioned, this is our final, so it's not due next time. It'll be due a little bit later, but next time we'll have some demos to talk about, just some stuff, because we're winding down, you know, try to finish the final, go strong, right? Work hard, make it look cool, but we're definitely also winding down with our classes. So here's your card. It's been assigned. Hopefully everything's clear. Let me know if you have any questions. This is probably the most important thing you could look at, which is just make sure you have these 3 different types of drawings. And then next time for next class, although I'll have some stuff prepared to like demo and just show you some last little fun techniques for digital, please bring some work. Like if you have something you're in progress, you're like, hey, I'm in the inking stage, or I'm like cleaning up my drawing, and you want critique of that, we can do that as well. We're at time. I'll see you guys next week. Great ideas. Always fun to hang out.